We're live.
Yep.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Porn Free Millennial podcast. I have a very special guest on today. His name is Kyle Shepard. And Kyle, you are the author of The Resilient Mental State. And Kyle, also, you're a military resilience instructor, fitness instructor, father, and I think you're into Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well. You're is it brown belt?
Yes,
Where
sir.
you at right now? Dang, okay, so is that the next step before you hit black belt? Or
Correct.
is
The
there
next
one before?
the next belt.
Wow. How long have you been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for?
I've been training. I started with mixed martial arts, but then fell into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu now a little over 8 years ago. So, yep.
Dang. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, so today, so Kyle's big focus is talking about resiliency and building a strong, resilient identity. And what I wanted to talk to Kyle about today for this podcast is how to build a resilient identity and not just build it, but how to also maintain it, because I think that's really important, right? You can build yourself up, but how do you keep that going throughout life, through the highs and the lows, right? So I think before we jump into some of the topics we wanted to discuss today, Kyle, you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself and just how you got into writing your Substack and how you really got into just resilience training for the military. I think that's really interesting.
Appreciate the intro, brother. Thank you very much. And I love what you said already about kind of differentiating achievement from sustainment, because a lot of us
Mm,
can grit for a while and accomplish something that we're proud of. But when it comes to skills, traits, and concepts like resilience, sustaining it is way harder than having momentary success. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about that a lot more. But to your question about me, how I fell into this realm, life's wild, and it's very funny. I can't say it was intentional, and I love that word intentional. A lot of things in my life are intentional now, but as a kid, I was always interested, and I say this on a lot of the podcasts I'm on, but it's true. I became interested in mental health, psychology, and really, without knowing the word per se, resilience at a young age, and more so like why some people manage stress quite well in response to pretty chaotic events. And then the same event would cause others to have significant detriments in their function. And why could one stressor cause such variable responses across people? That was a question I always thought about in relation to people I cared about that did struggle with prolonged stress. And that kind of stayed with me. I went to, after high school, I went to Ohio State and double majored in psychology, and then speech and hearing science. Psychology was the first degree I pursued, and it was probably in much relation to that. I thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist until I started
mm,
taking some of those chemistry classes and realizing how hard they were while simultaneously observing psychiatrists in action. And it's funny, we have this thought of what we want to do, and then we get to experience it live and see what goes into
yeah.
we pivot. So I fell into speech and hearing science from working with kids with autism and Asperger's syndrome and other individuals on continuums of communication disorders. And that naturally led me to speech and hearing science, thinking I was more interested in communication. But again, you get some experience in the arena, and very naturally, from what I maybe some of my strong suits and interests, I loved audiology. And so then I pursued my doctorate in audiology up in Northeast Ohio, and upon graduation, I commissioned into the Navy, and that was
Mm,
12 years ago. So I became a Navy audiologist, and I've been doing that for 12 years in uniform. But in the Navy, it's very much encouraged to impact your command, your region, and the military as a whole, if you can, in ways outside of just your specialty area. So I'm an audiologist, but we also are trained that we are officers first, we're leaders first, and finding ways to make an impact is of the utmost importance. And so there are things called collateral duties, or basically just other ways that you can contribute to your command in different ways. And I learned of a program at my first duty station now. I mean, that's getting closer to 11 years ago. I've been saying 10 years for a while, but I've been talking about this stuff for long enough. We're getting close to 11 years when I was originally
wow.
trained in a military program called Combat Operational Stress Control, or COSC. The
Mm,
Navy Marine Corps stood up this program back in 2007 in response to the long-term engagement that we had overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq. There were high rates of burnout, Lots of decreased function, not only in uniform, but in all the civilians and contractors supporting the Department of Defense and their dependents, and of course around the world, and that you'll have in response to war. So every branch of service was tasked with standing up a program. COSC was what was stood up in the Navy, and I was trained in that program, particularly for caregivers in the healthcare setting. So they had caregiver occupational stress control, because when you talk about someone providing services from a caregiver perspective, that takes its toll. Burnout is high in the healthcare setting and the military setting, because these
Right.
altruistic personalities, these people looking out for others, we tend to forget about looking out for ourselves. So we'll talk
Sure.
about conceptually, anything can be done in excess without awareness, early intervention, and optimization. You can lose touch of your identity and yourself, even if you have the best of intentions. So after being trained in that program for the past 11 years, I went from being a member to on the leadership team to being the actual lead of the program at my second duty station in Guam, where we grew to over 100 members, which was the largest program in the Navy. And I got recognized for some cool best practices that we created together. And then I came to Southern Maryland for my next duty station back in early 2020. And that's when COVID hit, the pandemic hit. And I've been in Southern Maryland now at Patuxent River, a Naval Air Station there, since that time. And it was during COVID when everything shut down that I started writing on these concepts. And it's interesting
Mm.
when you put some of the knowledge that you have into your own words and putting thoughts to paper. Um, I've been practicing it in different domains, but not really like consolidating, conceptualizing what this stuff I was teaching meant to me in my life. And by this time, I'm now a husband, a father of two. And during COVID, like anyone else, being bored long enough at home, we got pregnant again. And so my third was on the way. And journaling helped me quite a bit, and putting these thoughts to paper. And that's when the writing journey started. And I kind of created my own program, if you will. And I now collaborate at my duty station with some of the mental health providers that talk about stress management, because these realms love when non-mental health experts talk about these concepts. Because coincidentally, I got into audiology from working with individuals on the spectrum of communication disorders.
Mm.
Most in this world fall on a spectrum. You talk about healthy versus we need professional intervention. Most things operate in between. We have amazing resources when we get to illness, when we need professional support for addiction, substance abuse, mental health disorders, any progression of issues that had plenty of opportunity for intervention earlier in the process. And
Mm.
then, of course, what is well? What is completely good to go? When are we ever without stress or without issues? Almost everything falls on a spectrum in between. And writing about these concepts and trying to apply them to not only what I teach, and I feel like I do this job in the military as much as any other job I have now, teaching resilience concepts. Um, how do we make that available for the masses, all ages, with past generations having susceptibility to certain types of maybe mental toughness, if you will, newer
Sure.
generations having more susceptibility to emotional intelligence, drawing from lessons
Mm.
learned and ancient wisdom that we've had throughout time to optimize resilience in response to any stressor. Long-winded answer to a complete evolution that didn't become intentional until lately, and how I can cultivate the skill of resilience, not only for myself, but in being able to potentially train it and make it conceptually available for anyone interested.
That's fantastic. I was just thinking as you were talking, I mean, how do you define the word stress just throughout your career, through your life? How would you define that for an individual?
So you can do some presentations with me, because I ask this question to when I start my briefs. I like asking to start off. So I ask, like, how do you define resilience? How do you define stress? And a way that helps people when they struggle initially with that question is, okay, let's come back one. Let's How do you differentiate a stressor from
Mm.
stress? And that's
Okay.
important delineation. We tend to think of stress as the stressor. Like, I define stress as my job, or I define stress as the uncertainty happening right now in the US government because they are removing certain positions or downsizing, if you will. These are stressors. These are events that are taking place either externally, or sometimes our biggest stress is internal. They're value conflicts, it's rumination on things outside of your control. These are all stressors. Your thoughts can be stressors based on how you interpret them and use them. Stress is your response to a
Mm.
stressor. And that response can be subconscious. It can be just a patterned reaction that you don't put much conscious effort into. And I can pretty much guarantee you that if you're not putting conscious effort into your stress, it is less than ideal in how you're responding. But stress is neither good nor bad. Stress is a
Mm,
response and a perspective. I mean, physiologically, it is an innate response that we have when sensory signals come into our brain and activate our limbic system. The amygdala takes in sensory signals from our vision, our hearing, the detection of a threat or an anomaly, and it activates our core brain, our limbic brain. And that physiological response is the same thing every single time that it is initiated. Really cool information, too, from a woman by the name of Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor. She's a
mm,
neuroscientist, I believe, but she came up with she did some research and she came up with what's called the 90-second rule. And what it
okay.
conceptually states is the stress response on average, without rumination, without continued thoughts, is about 90 seconds. So think a good friend of yours snuck up behind you on this podcast and scared you. And then you turn around, you know it's not a threat, you know it's your friend, he's a goofball, no big deal.
Right.
That initial reaction, stress response is activated. And yeah, go check your six.
Gotta check my
we're,
six.
we're setting you up. So no, that initial reaction activates the stress response. There are neurotransmitters that
Okay.
are released in your body. Your heart rate comes up, your breathing changes, your peripheral vision is activated, blood comes out of your gut to support other organs. So the fight, flight, or hopefully not fright response is activated. So
Mm,
how we evolved is our core brain. The stress response is what has really helped us before we lived in this modern time with all this technology that helped us deal with threats from either other tribes or creatures that wanted to take our life. It helped us determine how to effectively respond by training the system to evolve. So the stress response, again, is the same thing that happens every time in response to a stressor. But 90 seconds on average, in my example I gave to you, is now you know there's no threat. You don't keep thinking about why would he do that on a podcast and mess us all. You don't ruminate in any way.
how did he
You're
get in my
probably,
RV?
yeah, no rumination. You're probably getting close to baseline within 90 seconds. But we think
Okay.
about the stress response. Most of us think and ruminate and contemplate either on the past or the future much longer than 90. And we feel the effects of stress much longer than that time period. And any form of stress, if you don't recover from it, is going to take its toll. Burnout
Mm,
is differentiated from resilience only by recovery. I can hold, and I do this analogy all the time too. I could hold this glass of water this entire conversation, no problem. This mild, not even recognizable stressor right now is no problem for me. So I can deal with this. But if I have to hold this for a week without putting it down, we have a real problem. This stressor will take its toll and eventually
mm.
build up to a point that I cannot manage it. I need to put it down. I need to change hands. I need to hand it off to a friend. I need to find ways to manage this stressor effectively and eventually recover from it so it doesn't take its toll on me. Again, another long winded answer, but stress is a physiological response to a stressor. The impact that it has on your body has to do with either recovery or your perspective of it, because you can
Mm,
unpack stress further and say distress versus eustress, EU stress. And that is really just your perspective on the impact that adversity can have on you. Because without stress, there is no change. We need stress for growth. You need to experience stress in order to build the skill that is resilience. So if you
mhm.
avoid stress, life actually is going to get much harder for you over time. So stress is neither good nor bad. It's our perspective of it and how we manage it, and of course recover from it in order um, to thrive, survive, or suffer.
Wow, and I'm sure that when you're working in the military too, I mean, that can be very it almost brings it to the ground level, to the very, I guess, primal nature of humanity, of defending our tribe, so to speak, potentially through violence, right? And how that, but I feel like, I mean, how did that open up your world as you started to work within that, of just really seeing, I mean, because I guess when I think about what you're talking about as a civilian, uh, some of the things I could be stressed about could be completely different, or I wouldn't wanna say trivial, but compared to somebody on the battlefield, someone putting their life on the line, and just the amount of stress that there can be there. I mean, so when you're working in the military, what are some key, uh, core foundations that you teach or that you, And maybe this goes into what we're talking about and how to develop resiliency. But I mean, I could only imagine with that. I mean, you're prepping people to put their life on the line, and then also, how do they recover from that, from these situations? Because I could only imagine how traumatic that would be to be a part of that.
I want to go back. It wasn't a question, but I want to go back to a point that you made because I think a lot of people struggle with a point that you made about trivial stress and trivial stressors in the grand scheme of things. Because again, perspective can change your reality. Like perception
Mm,
is reality, right? But your perception is your reality. It's not anyone else's reality. And also, you can change your perception to change your reality and the environment around you. So we know when you read a few books or you watch the news, things can be worse for sure.
sure,
And you can take
sure.
whatever is trivial for you and then think about the greater scheme of things. And that could either make you feel ashamed or make you feel empowered. So, like the last thing you want to tell somebody when they're struggling is, it could be a lot worse, man. Why that? You're not in the battlefield. It's not that bad. Like, you know,
Right.
you're in an emotional state, you don't want to hear that. It is nice to prepare your mindset for that when you're in a good place. But I love the quote: "The worst thing that's ever happened to someone is the worst thing that's ever happened to them." So again,
Mm,
the stress response doesn't differentiate the severity, perceived severity of a stressor. Like, sure, you can have a more intense stress response, and and the time can vary based on the amount of time either the true stressor is present or the amount of time that you ruminate on it. But again, the stress response is the same no matter what. So if the worst thing that's ever happened to you is said trivial thing, that doesn't differ what's happening inside your body and the toll that it can take if it's not managed well and recovered from. So I'm glad you brought that up because it's such an important point in today's day and age, where we have access to so much information and the perspective we take, the interpretation of the thoughts that we have sometimes can decrease our resilience because of shame. There's nothing wrong with guilt when you feel bad about doing something that you know doesn't align with your values and you want to not do that again. But when you feel shame in response to past mistakes or current stress, you're not setting yourself up for a resilient identity and a resilient mindset. So shame is attacking your identity. It's attacking who you are rather than guilt is around like this action is not representative of what my identity is. And I think shame can be quite prevalent when we think of how great life can seem online, or how we should be. And I learned this when I went to Naval Hospital Guam and got on the leadership team, which was primarily psychologists and other mental health professionals, and I would start teaching these classes with them. But they would say, "Quit shoulding all over yourself." So this
mm,
word "should" is a great trigger. When you're saying the word "should," it's an opportunity for early intervention of either you can do this or you'll do it differently, or like it's unrealistic at this point in time. So
mm.
accepting yourself for where you are is very important. Accepting what's happened in the past, trauma included, is very important because it's outside of your control. And now, how can I get better? There's no such thing as perfect, but there's always opportunities for improvement. And that doesn't mean you don't accept who you are today. It's I want to keep getting better progressively in whatever way is important to me, while simultaneously having that self love, having that respect for who you are, what you've been through, and the opportunity you still have while you're alive. Now, getting back to your question about how I
Yeah.
talk concepts in the military, I always start off with resilience is a skill that can be trained. I
Mm,
truly believe that. Aspects of resilience before you start thinking about intentional training have to do with previous experience. So, unfortunately, you think of childhood trauma and issues. You don't want to wish that on anybody, but you see some pretty exceptional individuals who overcome that. You see way more that's often not talked about, people who fall apart and become compromised because of it. So it's not anything. I don't think we should implement childhood trauma to cause resilience in people, but experience can really change your schemas and your perceptions of the world and what is possible. And if you find ways to deal with past experience, reflecting on that and knowing what you've overcome can really set the mindset for what you can do in the future. So previous experience, support
real
system,
quick on that. Oh, can I jump in real quick?
please.
So, yeah, yeah, before you hop to the next one, previous experience, I struggle with sometimes, and, put it in the chat if you do too, but it's almost sometimes like we discount our previous experiences. We don't, think about it hard enough to say, "Hey, I really got through something really hard," or I really rose to the occasion during this tough circumstance." I've had some moments with family members where I've had to step in and be incredibly vulnerable to help them out. And I look back on that sometimes as a way to empower myself to say, "Hey, you stepped in. You did something really helpful for somebody." Do you think sometimes, at least in this culture or people that you work with, we often just discount these moments in our lives, these past experiences?
Or even forget about them. So like bringing
Mm,
conscious awareness to your past, and why we forget has many different reasons. So I love Substack for 100 reasons, but one thing that I do every day, I like reflective questions. Questions activate that executive function. It helps you reflect on yourself. Um, and so every morning in my community thread, I put out a reflective question. I call it a worthwhile reflection, and then ask a hard question of some kind. And I recently, coincidentally, asked about past adversity that taught you about how resilient you are. Like reflect on that. And it can be just you think about it yourself or people respond, and it's so cool. Like it's not great to see some of these terrible things that people have been through, but when you see the lessons that they draw from inevitable hardships that you have no control over whatsoever, um, when you reflect back on that, like wow, that time period was incredibly difficult, but that gave me tools and a perspective that helps me respond to other challenges now. And then you also think back, like time. I love calling everything a mental state, which I think you know already. And I'll say sometimes time is a mental state. You think back
mm,
on, I know one of the hardest periods of my life lasted a month. It was after my wife and I moved to Guam. We got pregnant right after our wedding ceremony. We moved to the other side of the world. And then we were expecting within a month. And we were really excited. We were going to be new parents and we were newlyweds. And unfortunately, they say the most common miracle in the world is childbirth. What they don't talk about as often is the most common tragedy is the loss of a child, particularly miscarriage. And so we had a
mm,
first miscarriage, and we were not prepared for that, and that jolted us hard. And we earlier in our and very early in our marriage, and still early in our relationship, we were put to a test that we risked not overcoming, and poor coping strategies such as alcohol. And I like the book The Five Love Languages. It really helped me
yeah,
reframe how I
it's a
show love.
great book.
I'm a big physical acts person. I show love through physical acts, and that's what I was trying to do for Mary Kate during this time. But I wasn't connecting with her. I was
Mm,
grieving in my own way. But I'd recently found mixed martial arts and jujitsu, and so I was training twice a day before and after work. And I'm working full time in a hospital too. So the time that we were together, um, I'm trying to cultivate this environment to make her not have to worry about anything. But man, I wasn't really taught. I mean, I'm of an old school mindset that I still work on quite a bit, and she's made me much better with. But suppressing my feelings, like somehow
mm,
talking about where I am in the grief, and I try to put on a strong face when I'm actually suffering, and thinking that's helping me. And it was causing disconnection, and we really struggled. But this was only a month, and when we almost separated, when she almost came home from Guam, we were like, this is getting to a point where we don't want to go here. So all stop. Let's decrease alcohol intake. Let's increase connection. We did something called technology time. So we removed technology when we were together in the evenings,
mm.
no distractions whatsoever. And then we had devotions. So some guided discussion to end. I mean, I fell in love with her all over again during this time period. We got to know each other better. Ironically, I'm an audiologist. She's a speech pathologist.
Okay.
We should be expert communicators. We were not communicating well. We didn't have good habits, especially in response to adversity. When it came to communication, I feel like I became a man and a husband, and became better prepared to be a father in response to that loss. And we were pregnant a month later, but that
Wow.
month seemed like forever. And when I
Mm,
reflect back on that, and that loss is just one of three that we've experienced, and we've experienced a second term loss with a girl on the way that we
wow.
were glad to have named her, and that was, I mean, on paper, the hardest thing I've ever experienced. But you could argue. My wife and I, well, don't get me wrong, grieved, very challenging. You could argue we responded in a healthier fashion, more resiliently to that second term loss more recently, because of this past experience, because of that reflection of time, even though the time it took us to get pregnant again was much longer and the trials were much heavier, again on paper. But the worst thing that's ever happened to somebody is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. And you could say that first term loss was harder than our later second term loss, just based on the experience that we had, the resilience that we had, and the support that we had of one another from the skills that we had derived from that experience.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. That's very vulnerable. So I appreciate you sharing that. Wow. Yeah. So I think you just looped into it. I think your next thing that you were talking about was having a support system.
100%. So we talked about past experience being one component of resilience before we start talking about adding in intention. So past experience for sure. Support systems is another one. In today's day and age, we're pretty lucky. We are so connected. There are so many resources out there with a few Google searches or whatever your search engines are. You can find some resources to help you out for sure. We have a lot of backboards that are there for us. But again, professional intervention is just one component of support. And I would argue early intervention, less than professional support, can sometimes boost resilience even more. And
Mm,
sometimes no objective support whatsoever, but perceived support, knowing your networks, knowing who in your life you can lean on if you need to, just encourages resilience in and of itself. So I have a post from a while ago, but like knowing what your networks are, and you can definitely find them. I found it in Substack. There are so many amazing individuals.
oh yeah.
Gain insights from, I gain resilience knowledge from. And then, of course, outside of these digital communities, going out and pursuing skills, or whether it be like communities through religion, through athletic endeavors, through interests that you may have, library groups, reading groups, you name it. There are endless opportunities to cultivate your own perceived support systems, your own networks, if you do not have them already. So reflecting on what are those support systems that you currently have is crucial, and thinking about like what perceived support, like who do I know I can count on, and just knowing that can encourage resilience. When we talk about support, it might be a good time to bring this one up. I learned in undergrad, I worked at the James Cancer Hospital at Ohio State. And so I worked in pain and palliative medicine, end of life care, extreme levels of
Mm,
pain, poor prognoses, very difficult situations. And supporting these physicians, and particularly the psychologists that I worked with, and we did a lot of research in optimizing outcomes and um, increasing subjective well-being during these hard times. It was very interesting to learn like goals related to management, particularly in this case of pain. And these physicians told me if someone's a 10 out of 10 on pain, my goal is not to make them a 1. It's, first of all, it's impossible. And second of all, even if I could just walk them back to great, that's not a sustainable solution. You want to
mm.
you want to improve their issue, their distress, or in this case, their pain, to a point of effective management outside of medicine. So, ideal medical support is not walking people back to well being with professional intervention in perpetuity. It's bringing someone to get someone over that hump, if you will, to get them to a 6 or a 7, which is a significant change if you were at a 9 or a 10. But then at that point, trying to optimize their own support systems, their own management, and decrease the, the professional intervention and increase personal resilience, personal ability to manage. And again, if we're not talking end of life care, having them be able to walk themselves and with guidance where they ask for it from a 6 or a 7 back to that 1. There's your sustainable solution. There's where unique applications of whatever the issue may have been in the first place can be applied to getting back to thriving. You can't make someone thrive. That is a self pursued endeavor, and that is going to be unique across people and populations. So conceptually, great, generalized, but individually, we need to analyze and encourage our own empowerment, our own accountability, our own application of strategy that could be useful for us.
Do you think that people struggle with reaching out to build community, or it seems like I would say if you asked me what resilience was when I was younger, I might have answered being more self-reliant, but without understanding that how do you build that self-reliance? Well, you have to have it, you have to draw from community and others, right? That you were saying. Do you find that that's a struggle with people that you work with on and like what is that where people struggle with connecting with others or almost sometimes I've heard it before when I'm working with people that struggle with porn addiction is I don't want to like be a burden on other people. Do you see that with people that you work with that mindset?
100%. Yeah, misapplication of strength,
Mm,
misapplication of what resilience is. And I love just thinking about uppercase stoicism versus lowercase stoic. And
mm,
lowercase stoic has to deal with not expressing or demonstrating emotion, flat affect, persevering. And when it comes to life and death situations, suppressing emotion and maintaining um, function is imperative. So, fight, flight, or freeze responsive. If there is safety on the line, you do want to table those emotions, put them aside, and apply that old school mental toughness, if you will. But uppercase Stoicism, the philosophy, this ancient wisdom that's been around long before some of the more recent generations, and I like to think of maybe the World War I and II generations, and even as we move toward Vietnam, having that old school mental toughness, like strap up your boots, suck it up, persevere. Talking about your feelings makes you a sissy. All of that stuff.
Mhm.
And maybe the world demanded that, at least perceptually, during that time because of the world wars. So that generation has more of that difficulty sharing, and I think that's a big one. So applying what true strength is. New age emotional intelligence also draws from stoic wisdom of understanding your feelings and managing them effectively. How I deal with anger is going to be much different than how I deal with sadness or resentment. So labeling those feelings, finding ways to manage them and overcome them so I can continue to perform. You got that right, Gene. I'm not going to show the back on this podcast. Somebody just commented on the shirt. So mindset lessons on the field. Gene is on the podcast. Thank you. Um, how we how we manage those emotions is true resilience. So
Mm.
when it comes to speaking up and asking for help, that is a strength. Recognizing when you can persevere, when yes, you're feeling stressed, but your performance can still be high. I think awareness is the most important concept when it comes to resilience. So
Mm.
understanding where you are, what your functioning is, both externally and of course internally, how you're doing. Are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? Are you sacrificing? Old school mental toughness, altruistic personality types when you think military, healthcare, or most people want to do good. Most people intend well. But when you tip toward those selfless acts so much without selfishness, then if you're being selfless, you don't want to be a burden. You don't want to speak up. You don't want to ask for help because you're trying to help. But if you're not helping yourself, you cannot sustain your ability to help others. Again, I still struggle with that. I've gotten much better,
Mm.
thankfully, to my wife and my passion about resilience. But recognizing where you fall on something called, I like to teach the stress continuum. It's a tool made by that program I was trained in. So the stress continuum, it's public access, is online. It has green, yellow, orange, and red zones. And again, it just demonstrates that stress and our responses is a spectrum. You're not either green, good to go, or all stop red. You're usually somewhere in
Right.
between. And you need to be somewhere in between and recover from that to train resilience in the first place. But understanding your unique symptoms and how long they've been around. If you are not sleeping and it's been more than a month and you're not recovering at all, it's probably time to start asking for help or at least talking about it with your perceived support systems in your life. We think about the DSM, I think it's five text revised criteria now for mental health disorders. They all involve symptoms, the amount of symptoms on a given list, and then the time that they've been present. That's how you get a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, of major depressive disorder, post traumatic stress disorder. It requires symptom presence and intensity, and then time they've been around. Don't get me wrong, suicidal ideation, other things can get you there quickly, and that's good. We have support services for that, but a lot of things fall on a continuum. They are progressively built up over time without effective intervention. Asking for help is a strength when you know you are compromised to the point that you are not putting out what you intend to do.
Mm. Yeah. We could say that probably a million times is asking for help is a strength. Asking for help is a strength. Asking for help is a strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's huge. I mean, I look back on just my recovery with porn addiction and like how deep I got into depression and calling the actual helpline at one point because I just felt like I was at wit's end. But really, I look back at that point as like a flagship moment in my life where I can look back and say, "Hey, you asked for help and you needed help and you got help." And I think that's an important thing to reinforce with people listening if you're struggling with something is ask for help.
Yes,
Ask for help. And
absolutely.
especially there's people in your life that are more than willing, hopefully, right? That you have those folks in your life. Or if you don't, to start building a community or joining a community of people that can. But I think like you said, asking for help, wow, yeah, such a strength. Because and maybe it is like growing up from the aftermath of those world wars. I could imagine my parents growing up, they were born in the 60s. So I'm assuming that they likely got, I mean, that's what we get from our parents, right? Is almost like this passed down generationally how people deal with stress, how people manage it. And
I have a phone charger.
totally, I think spot on the money on what you
I
talked
have a
about is I think during
iPhone.
that time period of World War One, World War Two, you didn't have much, you didn't have much as much room or culturally the I think the awareness to talk through this stuff, right? And so I think that's really important that you touched on that.
Yeah.
uh
I
Gina asked,
I encounter it all the time. Yeah, just the inability to speak up at an opportune time. And don't get me wrong, you ask for help too soon, you're not helping yourself. You don't want to be handheld. You don't want, as soon as you feel stressed, to ask for help. You do want to be able to sit in that and determine if you are being resilient, if you're able to recover on your own. And on the flip side, you don't want to offer help or impose help too early. You want people to know that you're there for them. That perceived support, again, I think is sometimes more impactful than objective support. If my wife is
mm,
struggling and I demand that she just stops and I take care of it, I'm not helping her. Maybe I'm acutely taking care of the problem. Same thing as parenting. If my kid is struggling, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to let them struggle all day. But if I don't ever let them struggle, now we're going to have problems. If I'm being that helicopter parent and always intervening, they're not going to develop tools, develop strategies, which is going to be the third part of what I'm talking about, to manage the inevitable adversity the next time it comes around. So having the help there and utilizing it at appropriate times when your function is compromised and it has and you haven't been able to recover from it after a given amount of time contextually, and what makes sense, that is a strength. But it's not a strength to ask for it too early.
that's a great point. And we have a question really quick from Gina, and then we could hop into the next segment there of building a resilient identity. So Gina asked, Kyle, can you touch on trusting someone when you ask for help? That's my biggest thing right now. I have people offering to help, but it is now trusting them to do the job is what I'm struggling with. That's a great question. Like how to determine who you can trust with that information.
Trust and respect are two things I love to think about and write about. I believe respect, thanks, B. I believe respect can and should be given to all, just automatically. Like, even if you don't like somebody, you can still show respect to them.
Right.
And that keeps yourself rational. But trust should be earned. And like
Mm.
any skill, when you earn someone's trust or you let someone earn your trust, sorry, I'm just getting a charger plugged in here. My phone won't.
That
Um,
reminds me, I'll probably do the same,
yeah.
but so far so
Um,
good.
Yeah. So trust, systematically building that with people, because obviously, what do you trust them to do? You trust them to mow your yard. You trust them to kind of hear out some of your biggest problems in your life, or keep something a secret that you wouldn't want to otherwise share. That'd be great. Yeah.
Sure.
So systematic improvement of any skill is my answer to that. And if it is something big in your life, testing people at lower levels of trust to see if they earn that trust there, and then building is my answer. And Gina, if you need help with something, hit me up.
Great. All right. Well, that's a good answer there.
Thank you.
Uh, yeah, and I would just say from my perspective too, I think it comes from at least me. I check in with my brother every day. We do daily check-ins, like accountability check-ins with each other.
Mhm.
Uh, I think the trust developed over time. Or I've always trusted my brother, but with this really personal thing, I think it came from that we're both looking to better ourselves in this arena of life. Like we're both on the same path. So I think that sometimes helps with trust too, is if it is the arena that they've lived through or that they've been able to overcome or that they are a good example of, I think that can help too with trust, is finding someone that potentially is a little bit ahead of you or on the same journey. I think that can help as well with trust.
And the
So
domain too, like, do you trust them in one domain versus another? You can have different support systems for different domains. Like, I love your point of like almost like a mentor, if you will.
yeah,
You don't need a life mentor for all aspects of your life. Don't get me wrong. There are certain people that may offer that for you in some way, but positive and negative role models are usually one and the same. We're not, there's no such thing as perfection, and there's no such thing as maybe absolute trust other than hopefully your significant other eventually. But thinking about the domains of life where you do want to lean on someone, where you do want to trust them, or you do want to learn from them, that doesn't need to be like I need to have 100% agreement across the board or admiration across the board in order to leverage the benefits of trust, learning, mentorship, etc.
yeah, and it's almost like too you can go back to that previous experience too, and yeah, bringing that up as well. Like I have a mentor and a coach that I've worked with now for gosh 4 years now, and it's someone that's ahead of me, someone that is has a proven ability, I think, to earn that trust that I have for him. So okay, so we've got previous experience, support system, and then what's the next part of building resilience?
Develop strategies. That's the
Okay.
last. And that's where we can add a lot of focus because you, of course, can create experience, and I will talk about that too. You can cultivate networks and support systems, as we talked about, but your strategies, for sure, are part of your resilience. How you cope, your mindset, other aspects of it, that all can impact your resilience. So, I mean, very simply, like a developed strategy would be identity. Like, how do you identify? Like, your identity is going to influence your resilience for sure. And there are great exercises to help you determine what your identity is. One of the first things that I did in that training, now 11 years ago, was something called a core values exercise. And again, this is something that you could look up online. There are hundreds of them because it's very simply just a list of a bunch of attributes or adjectives that all look great on paper. And so think of 100 words, wisdom, courage, justice, discipline, the cardinal virtues, but then along like family, self improvement, sacrifice, you name it. All of these things are on that piece of paper. So the task that we were given in class was okay, of these, let's say 100 words, pick out the six that are most important to you, your six
Mm,
values that you say are most important to you in your life right now. And I like that point in your life right now because these values can and will change over time just based on the phases of life and where you are. So we picked out six challenge in and of itself for sure. This is a what I like to call intentional stress exercise, and I write about this kind of stuff all the time, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But for this exercise, after determining your six, then you want to rank order them one to six. What is your number one value down to number six? Also,
mm,
very challenging. And what I like to add in after that, we didn't do this in training, but a big one for me is okay, now let's write down how you think your actions are currently in alignment with those values.
mm,
And that's a big one. An honest reflection on how your actions are in alignment with your values, which I think a lot of us are probably guilty of just not even considering. We all intend to do well, but what does that mean? That's going to be quite variable. What are your values? And there's no like, I have better values than you. No, I mean, most people do not value evil. Most people become that or have genetic susceptibility to something where they don't perceive the world in the same way others do. Um, most people are good. Most people intend to do good, but get lost from misalignment of their actions with the values
mm,
that they may or may not be aware of. So, this practice of reflecting on what your core values are is my favorite intentional stress challenge to talk to people about. If you want to hear what I think, again, I don't like the word should, so I hear myself every time I say it. But if people were to ask me, which one should I start with? I say self reflection. It's something we all can do um, while at rest, but it is not an easy task. And
sure.
doing that then can help you start to devise plans for where am I doing well? Where are my opportunities for improvement?
Mm, I like that. And I think you were saying too that it's almost as if we go through life sometimes and we get when we're going through the motions, right? And we're not even thinking about these things. We're not even thinking about how, and I think with what I talk about with porn and consumption and everything, for a long part of my life, I wasn't even thinking about how this was in direct contradiction with my values, and one of the values of being someone a man of integrity, someone that behind the scenes is who you see when you meet me, when you talk to me. It's the same person. What is that? Is that do we just get so caught up in like work and other things that almost like we're suppressing these things down, we don't want to face them? Or is it just more or less this unconscious, just, hey, this I don't really want to think about it right now. I don't want to think about how potentially like hey, if I'm drinking more regularly, like you were talking about earlier, or hey, I find myself watching porn when I'm stressed out, or when I don't really want to think about these tough things and address them. Like, what is that, just through your experience, that people struggle with there?
I made a note recently that I was proud of, and I don't like saying things that I'm proud of when I write stuff, but I was proud of this one. And it's a very simple note, but it's
Yeah.
when awake, stay conscious. I
Mm,
think to
mhm.
your point, um, it's very easy and sometimes good to intentionally turn our brains off. There's so many inputs, there's so many demands, and we need rest, cognitively, physically, you name it. But that intention word is so important because I think we can live quite passively easily these days. We don't have daily threats to our life. We don't have basic needs to fulfill by going out and getting our food and supporting the tribe and making sure we have dry shelter to endure the elements. Most of our basic level needs are taken care of for us. If not, they're available in abundance in
Right.
industrialized nations. So we can live pretty passively, pretty subconsciously, and just become victims to our urges. And a lot of these urges, by the way, were initially imperative for our survival. Eating, having against shelter. So basically, having pursuing comfort, not necessarily to be comfortable, but to live in temperature and wet and all these other areas. We've evolved to pursue these urges so we can survive. But now that they are available, these basic level needs have, in many ways, have become a liability. They've become something that we are evolved to pursue and then end up doing in excess. So whether it's
Yeah.
food, whether it's comfort, or to your example, procreation. We need to procreate. We need to have sex in order to create the next generation. Our species doesn't survive without sex. And we are one of those species that also were made to enjoy it. And now with 24/7 endless access to, especially for developing minds or less than optimized minds because you're struggling and you want to detach, you have it right there at your fingertips throughout the day. And then you do it enough, and it's a way to cope, it's a way to turn off. It becomes a habit, and it becomes a subconscious habit. It becomes a coping mechanism that you use to table the inevitable stressors in your life, to get away from the stress in response to everything else, because I promise you life is going to be stressful. And when you evolve these coping mechanisms that are not of benefit to you, and there, I like asking this question in some of my classes: is exercise a positive or a negative coping strategy? What would your response be?
Oh yeah, I think typically positive, but at the same time, if it's becoming if you're just over, I think you were talking about this, and I've had this in points in my life too, where you're almost in the gym the whole day. You might be missing out on other important aspects of your life, like connection with other people. You were saying support groups. I think uh being aware of other things.
Yep.
So I think
Anything.
it can be great for sure, but I found at times, I remember this one time in my life, uh, I think I was going to the gym 3 times. At the time, I was single, but, I mean, I was going to the gym, like, 3 times a day, right? And at that time, I think it was a positive thing for me, but then I had to cut that back once I was in a relationship, right? Because that we only have so much time in the day,
Yep.
and you're gonna miss out on other aspects of your life or personal development, right? If you're just lifting weights all day and not talking to anyone, you got your podcast in or your music in, and you're not connecting with others, that could definitely become more of a negative coping strategy.
Nailed it.
That'd be my answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Note I posted this morning: anything can be done in excess, even the positive.
Mm.
Absolutely. We know the negative stuff can be done in excess. So when I ask, is drinking alcohol a positive or negative coping strategy? It's to highlight if you're of age and that is something that you enjoy doing. In excess, of course it can. That's a poison. And by the way, even one drink can compromise your sleep, yada, yada. But if you're of age and you are a responsible drinker in moderation and have a glass of wine with your spouse to slow down a little bit and connect, I would argue that's a positive coping strategy in the social realm and in other ways. Again, thinking responsible. You don't have to do that. It's not for all, but maybe for some. And then my joke that because I always like trying to get laughs when I give presentations, I ask in the military. This is the setting that I'm talking to because I don't have strong opinions on much. But is doing illegal drugs a positive or coping negative strategy? And of course,
No
the
one raises
military.
their hand.
In the military, that's a negative coping strategy. Don't do drugs, kids. That can get you in trouble and kicked out. Intention behind all things, and at this point in time, uh, tread lightly there. But yeah, absolutely. Moderation, intention behind your efforts, staying conscious into what you're doing and why is imperative because we can create less than ideal habits very quickly when we are not
Mm,
reflecting on who we are and who we want to become. You can basically become who you want to be internally by decisions. Way easier said than done, though. So you are going to slip up, you're going to make mistakes. But when you know who you want to be, you can start doing that today based on the interpretation of your thoughts. So when I talk about controllables in this life, I like to boil it down to two things. And really, the first one is always interpretation of your thoughts. I don't know about you. I have some crazy thoughts that come into my head sometimes, and I'm not very
sure.
proud of them. Where they come, I love Stephen Pressfield's book, the War of Art, and he
I haven't
talks
read
about.
that.
I highly recommend it as a writer, but really as a person, and it is kind of framed for creativity and writers, but it can be for anything. And he talks about basically showing up, having discipline around the endeavor that's important to you, and giving yourself opportunity to experience the muse. Um, and the
Yeah,
muse is those positive thoughts that come to you out of nowhere. I have a lot of thoughts that I really don't deserve much credit for. They come to me, and then I start writing
sure.
about them, or I start applying them, and couldn't tell you why they came there. I'm happy they did, but man, the internal resistance, capital R resistance, is the other side of that equation. He talks about quite a bit. The excuses that come up in my head, and the justifications I make to do things, to not do things, or do things that I would not be proud of. I mean, I I'm a big believer and practitioner of using fitness to train resilience and, of course, to improve health and performance across domains. I've worked out daily for a long time in some way, shape, or form. Every day is still challenging. Um, Even today earlier, my mind is telling me and giving me ideas of ways to either not do what I planned or ways to pivot or not do it altogether. I feel that resistance every day. Right in the morning, that's the first thing that I do after I wake up. I do a reflection on a quote and I post that, and that's the way to get my brain going. But sometimes I don't feel like doing it. But every time I do, that delayed gratification. So what happens with that thought that comes in, whether it's positive or negative, I don't get credit for that, but how I interpret it and how I apply that, that's my first moment of opportunity for a controllable in my life. And then after that, the subsequent actions that we take. And that could be cognitive actions like the intention we set, or of course, behavioral actions like our words, our physical acts and behaviors. And man, interpretation of our thoughts is such an opportunity for control in a life that we don't have much control over. But you start optimizing those thought interpretations, you start changing your mental habits, which will influence your physical habits. And that has changed my life in countless ways. And again, coming back to awareness of those thoughts, because a concept I like to talk about and teach quite a bit is emotional reasoning versus rational reasoning. When I'm
Mm,
in an emotional state, that is probably not the time to make big life decisions or even small decisions on my words, actions, or email I'm about to send out, you name it. So recognizing those emotions. Again, I like the idea of labeling emotions, having that emotional intelligence to understand what you currently are experiencing and why, and then implementing strategies that you can develop to walk yourself back to rationality, to slow down that stress response. Again, that's on average about 90 seconds, but we ruminate, we think, and it prolongs. How can I manage it effectively and then eventually overcome it, which is how I define resilience. Resilience is the ability to effectively manage and eventually overcome stress. Again, stress neither being good nor bad. It's that sentence that I base a lot of my presentations off of. Unpacking stress, talking about recovery, what kind of strategies can help with management. And then, of course, resilience is a skill that can be trained. And that's when I start talking about intentional stress, deliberately causing discomfort in a particular domain with prepared strategies for a brief period of time that you can then use and recover from, so you can optimize our innate physiology that is the stress response, so you can try to start conceptually applying it across domains and have that awareness in your body, whatever your unique symptoms might be, of increased heart rate. For me, I'm very aware of my breathing, so when my breathing changes, I catch that, and then I can
Mm.
implement intentional breathing, nasal inhales, slow, prolonged exhales, causing parasympathetic nervous system activation to slow my body down, which can happen in real time while I let some time pass and hopefully get back to more rationality to determine what I want to do next.
So it's almost like you're explaining creating that space. You get the and there's a great Viktor Frankl quote that sticks with me, but it's more or less paraphrasing it is uh, the freedom comes in our lives when we create space between that stimuli and what our response is. I think you nailed it on the head. It's being able to recognize what is that stimuli, how's that making me feel inside? Am I getting stressed out because of it? And then creating that space to then make a good rational choice decision responding to it, right? Because that's basically what you were talking about is effectively overcoming and managing that stress that comes in.
We tend to operate in today's day and age, and probably throughout time, because the Stoics were writing about it way back in the day too, or at least teaching what
Right.
others were writing about it. Stimulus reaction. So
Mm.
reaction would be those instincts that are probably less than optimized. No conscious consideration of what we're doing, stimulus instinct. And again, in a military application, fall back on your training. When life is on the line, you want to train, stress inoculate, a term that's used quite a bit, cause a stress response, develop physical reactions so you know what to do in order to
Mm.
increase survivability and lethality when it comes to conflict. But more often than not, life is not on the line. And if we go stimulus reaction, there's a huge opportunity to insert space between that stimulus and response. And by the way, Viktor Frankl, without question, one of my favorite people of all
Great
time,
book.
Man's Search for Meaning, one of the great books. He has great quotes. My goodness, when you talk about reflecting on history and what people are capable of, that book can show you quite well. And what he turned out of that experience to optimize what he was working on, coincidentally, before it started, the logos therapy. Wow, and it's just such an empowering story, and of course, what he turned out of that experience. But yeah, stimulus response rather than reaction is the ideal, but inserting space and in whatever way is unique and important or beneficial for you. I love the Bruce Lee quote: "Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add
Mm.
or make what is uniquely your own." And there are so
Mm.
many resources out there that could be beneficial to manage stress and recover from it. And I'm guilty of giving hundreds, and they're not forever. I don't use all of them. I'm aware of them. I've tried them, and some just don't apply to me. But you have to try them. There's a lot of knowledge out there, but you can have all the knowledge in the world, and it doesn't mean anything if you don't apply it. Wisdom is applying knowledge that is beneficial for you, finding the strategies to help you manage and eventually overcome stress. And you'll never know unless you add intention and conscious effort behind that to develop beneficial habits for you. I do love intentional breathing. I think that is a great bridge
Yeah.
behind our autonomic nervous system, which does change automatically in response to stress. We become aware of that, implement intentional breathing. It does, and it has shown through research, slow down the stress response. But anything that can help you get out of an emotional reasoning to a more rational state, so then we can start thinking about the most beneficial strategies to act upon and be resilient with. Absolutely, but we need to dial back from emotion before we can be kind of most competent in our subsequent actions.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. I wanted to circle back to 2 things that you mentioned, and I think we were talking about one of them before we started was, the difference between habit and addiction. But before I go into that, I thought you said something that was very profound, and, it really struck me as I was listening to this, but all of these, survival needs that we had throughout mankind until we got to this place of comfort, you mentioned that they're almost now, in a lot of cases, liabilities. I thought that was such a great point because when you look at it, and this might be a a can of worms that opened in my head, but the way I see it is you have all these industries, right? These giant industries that are really pushing out, I would say, poison in a lot of ways, right? When we look at our food, when we look at every commercial you see has to do with everyone drinking beer, getting drunk. All this gambling is another big one that's just crazy right now. Like you can't even watch like ESPN without knowing whose picks, like who's betting on what, all this stuff. But it seems like to me in this modern culture that we're in is all these needs that we have, having food, having sustenance, having community, having sex, they're all they've all been built into our culture as things. I would say uh, derived in a more of a way to keep you hooked or to keep you as a consumer to where you're consuming these things, but are they really sustaining you? Are they really uh are they really keeping you whole or help? Because I know back in the day, I mean, I hunt elk and deer and go fishing and stuff like that. I mean, for me now, that's more of a recreational thing, a traditional thing, a way to connect with nature. But I mean, back then, people were doing that to literally survive. And now it's almost like, yeah, you can go to any store. I know Tim's on listening right now, Tim Ebel. We had a podcast a few weeks ago and talking about just overeating and being addicted to food. That's a huge one that sticks out to me, to where you have to have this resilient mindset going into the supermarket to say, hey, and I deal with that too, daily basis going into the store is one thing that helps me create space is just looking at the label and just taking the time to actually read it. I've had many of times, I'd say the past 2, 3 years, maybe a little bit more than that, when I started to focus on my health more, of just looking at the label for a little bit and just saying, okay, what is this thing? If it has canola oil or vegetable oil in it, I'm just going to put it back. I don't even want to deal with that. But do you see that? I mean, maybe working with younger generations or generations more brought up in this consumer culture, and you could say older generations too, but it seems that at least like in the US, we're like the top consumer nation in the world, right? So we're constantly consuming things, but these things like you were mentioning, it seems like are becoming more liabilities for us in this world.
Yeah, I mean, what used to be a requirement for survival is now a reason that we don't thrive. And yeah, businesses have been made to scratch our itches very easily for us, and it's quite available to the point that you made. And like you said, I think all generations, again, we were optimized to seek out and appease these urges because they were not readily available. That is just part of our nature. We do pursue comfort. We pursue taking care of our hunger, taking care of these other urges that we may respectfully have as efficiently as possible to get back to our homeostasis, whatever makes us feel well. But because it's so readily available and because it's such a marketing opportunity to take advantage of from a business, without question, our culture, particularly in a consumer nation like the United States, but really around the world um, in most industrialized nations, you see people struggling because of abundance, not because of scarcity. And that
Mm,
scarcity mindset of imposing your own ability to take a step back and not just pursue and become a victim to your urges. You don't need to eat 3 meals a day to live. I mean, don't get me wrong, you need fuel and enjoying food. That there's nothing wrong with that. But if you miss a meal, you are not in danger, nor is that a good reason to even change your attitude. But I know, and I'm even guilty of this, being tired, being hungry, being whatever. I mean,
hangry.
hangry for sure, right? Like changing your attitude because you
Yeah.
have not had this itch scratch that you are feeling. We've become too comfortable, and if comfort is the goal, you're going to be quite uncomfortable, or make yourself uncomfortable from that abundance. And there are methods now to pursue that in excess and compromise your ability to thrive because of your pursuit of, again, whatever urges that take the most advantage of you. So how people respond to that, I haven't noticed a significant difference in younger, older generations from my realm. It's more just lack of awareness, lack of what is working for you and how well it aligns once again with what your true goals are, if you even made goals or reflect on your values in the first place. That often is just a revealing step where like, oh yeah, I'm not even consciously thinking about what's important to me, let alone like we tend to think what's important to us is obvious, but and we may put more value in money and engagement online or all these other metrics that are easier to measure as well-being. But well-being is quite simple. Again, it's just not easy to obtain, especially in these weird times where abundance is so prevalent.
Yeah, yeah. And then I was gonna
Excuse me,
dive
Papa.
into the next follow-up with habits and addiction, but first, we have Luna asking a question. I like that this one takes me a little bit back to my school days and the stress of studying for an exam. So Luna, we're gonna look to help you out here. So Luna says, "Hi Kyle, please give me some strategies to remain calm during or before exam. I tend to think of the worst outcome and drive myself crazy with negative thoughts." Thanks for posting that.
What's the worst outcome, Luna? You're going to fail that exam, and then you're going to be a failure in life, and no one's going to like you, and your life's going to be over. I'm obviously joking, but we can catastrophize quite easy with our stressors. We premeditate on worst case scenario and make it be a reason for anxiety rather than premeditating a worst case scenario and like, oh, I've actually overcome much worse than that. I love the
Mm,
idea of premeditation of the future or post reflection on the past, but the lens you decide to look at it through will really dictate how you respond to that inevitable thought pattern that we'll experience. We will foresee and prepare for the future. And by the way, that's important. Preparation is important in the ways that you can control. But rumination on worst case scenario is causing you to decrease your performance in what you can control, which is really just preparation for the exam. I was a procrastinator, so I would
me
cause
too.
myself way too much angst. I was like, "Oh, I perform well under pressure, so I'm gonna wait till the week of or the day of
Same,
to
same.
cram it all in and cause way more issues than I needed to." So one strategy that I've used to help me is I just move my timeline to the left. I still am a procrastinator, but my deadline is actually going to be a week or two before the actual deadline because crazy, but plans change. Things come up that get in the way, or you just don't show up when you're trying to procrastinate in the way that you were hoping for. So when you
Right.
move your timelines to the left and then you start executing on preparation or things that you have in your control, then you can pivot and start to have some lessons learned. Stress inoculation. I come back to intentional stress all the time. If certain domains are a challenge for you and causing anxiety, lean into those domains a little bit more in ways that are manageable for you. And then reflect on what is beneficial. So when it comes to tests in school, creating some self tests or working with peer groups in the programs to study, test yourself, see how you did. But moving that timeline to the left and then experiencing whatever it is can help you kind of shift your mindset toward in the first case. But the premeditation of worst case scenario has become something I like quite a bit for resilience because the worst thing that can happen is you don't wake up tomorrow or the people you love most wake up tomorrow. There's nothing that can shift your functioning like a health scare, either to yourself or your loved ones. And I don't think that's morbid to think about. I think with the losses that I've experienced and what I've seen people go through and know what's possible, remembering that takes me out of the rumination or the perspectives I have on what is truly significant, like how crazy my 3-year-old might be right now, how much he drives me crazy sometimes. But remembering, like, he might not wake up tomorrow, and that's outside of my
Yeah.
control. That brings me back to the now. That makes me want to live to the best that I can with the opportunity that I have today with him. And I don't show up perfectly. I still struggle. I struggled with it this morning. But as far as letting my emotions lead, letting the response that is detrimental to me linger, these kind of thoughts really help me shift my mindset in relation to that. I don't know if I answered the whole question, but that was my thought there.
Yeah, great answer there. Yeah, and good luck with the exam, Luna. I think you're gonna kick butt. And I think something important too, at least just looking back, just advice I'd give is just make sure you're taking care of your sleep. Uh, I think sleep is a huge thing. Uh, I think for me, I've always thought more clearly when I get good sleep. So maybe chunking out some study time and prepping ahead too, like you were saying, is uh, schedule out your week in advance. what times are you going to study, and making sure you're in a good environment too. Sometimes changing your environment can be a really good thing as well. Like, are you having a hard time studying because maybe it's just in your place? May go to a coffee shop for a bit, go outside for a walk, think about things. So, yeah, really good advice. And we had another question too from Adam PT. I love Adam's work. Adam's awesome. Uh, Adam has a question here. Hey, fellas, love this. I have a question for Kyle. How would you help? And this is something I think I actually wrote down as a question to ask you. So this is awesome. This came up. How would you help someone at total rock bottom begin to build their resilience from zero? I imagine the strategy needs to change, or do they?
Yeah. One other thing that I thought of real quick when you were talking about Luna is confidence is derived, in my opinion, from competence. So
Yeah.
if you are lacking confidence in your ability to execute on tests, another reason for stress inoculation and testing yourself early in the process, study and then have someone test you or test yourself. The more you do that and the more you deliver, or under deliver and then pivot your strategies on what's beneficial for you, that stress testing, intentional stress, again, in the domain that you're trying to get better, is the way to develop resilience, in my opinion. Now, when you're responding to inevitable life adversity, you got to do the best that you can to manage it and then eventually overcome it. And if that means failing a test and then having to reflect and pivot after the fact, that's worst case scenario. And I've been there. I've done that. And some of my biggest failures and losses in life have been my biggest opportunities. So remembering the real worst case scenario to take away significance of how important a test may or may not be. It is important. Respect everything and give it your best effort. But at the end of the day, finding ways to test yourself through stress, through preparation and strategies to improve is definitely what I recommend there. Coming back to
I'll,
Adam, go ahead.
oh, one second. I'll share a worst case scenario. This is from personal experience in college. So, Luna, one time I was studying for this marketing exam, and I think it was one of those classes where I think you took like 3 tests, and that was it. There was no homework, anything. It was basically just, "Hey, you come in and your final grade's basically the accumulation." It might have been 4 tests, but, I studied so hard for this thing. I think I remembered recording myself and, making a file, like a downloadable file, so then I was listening to it, just me going through the questions, all that stuff as I was going on walks. Like, I was studying so hard. Why I bring up sleep though was because I studied so hard for this thing. I was up all night, and I think it was like an 8 a.m. exam or something like that. I overslept, and I showed up late, and I literally went to this professor's office, like, saying, "Hey, I know I could just ace this thing," and she gave me a really hard life lesson. She said, "Hey, you didn't show up at the time," and, I think because I got a 0 basically for that, so I had to retake that whole class over again, and that was a really important thing that I remembered in my life, as it really sucked, and that really is one of the worst case scenarios that could happen, is you just completely don't even show up for the exam,
Read
and,
the whole
hey,
class again.
look at me now, but I just wanted to share that. Hopefully, that gives you a little bit of, "Hey, at least, if you show up, that's great too. You show up to take it, but, uh, definitely for me, that was one of those resilient moments. I look back from previous experiences, say, "Hey, I rejoined that class, the same exact class, I sat in the front, and I aced that thing." I think I got it was like 93, 94% grade in that class. I was like one of the best in the class just because there was no way in hell I was going to have to retake that again or get a B. I was gonna get an A. So I just wanted to share that really quick,
I like it.
Luna. So good luck on your tests and your future exams. So back to Adam, right? So
So
Adam's asking about those total, and I've been there before too, rock bottom moments. And how do you begin to build that resilience? Keep it
absolutely.
going.
So this goes back to what true strength is for sure, based on what that respective rock bottom is. But of course, seeking help, whether that's professionally in your support systems, again, based on the context of the situation, recognizing that you're struggling, and recognizing that you need support. Um, I love the quote, "I'm not okay, but I will be." Quite
Mm,
resilient quote. And I like mantras. I have mantras that I have inserted into kind of my psyche. So like when I feel the stress response, one of the first things that my mind tells myself is control what you can. very stoic philosophy, of course. Like, where is my true control? And really, it does come down to, again, my thought interpretations and my subsequent actions. Um, I also like the mantra, I can do hard things. I've done them before. I know I can do them again. So I can do hard things. When something feels hard, I know I can do hard things. But in this case, I'm not okay, but I will be. First and foremost, you are recognizing that you are not okay and that you need support, that you need to ask for help in whatever respective way makes sense for that rock bottom. But saying that I will be is such a resilient thing to add in after the fact. No matter what it is, if you are still breathing, you still have some fight in you. You still have the
Mm,
opportunity to improve. So, whatever happened, when it comes to trauma, when it comes to rock bottom, the next thing I would suggest is, with those support systems in place, I would bet you they're going to focus a lot on acceptance. Acceptance of the past. The past is dead. It doesn't mean it's dead to you. You need to remember it so you keep those lessons in the forefront of your brain. But again, your identity, shame has no benefit for you here. So accepting what has happened and the opportunity that it has to make you better. Acceptance is such an important concept from coming back from rock bottom. But now we've accepted ourselves, we've accepted the past, we can get better. And how we implement getting better, small wins. Progressive overload is an exercise physiology concept that I love, which has to do with starting somewhere manageable that you can execute in whatever domain you're trying to get better. So giving yourself a progressive challenge where I start manageable, I have strategies that I know are different than what I've done in the past so I can replace bad habits. I'm going to have that small win. I'm going to take that step. And once I start getting more comfortable with something that makes me a little uncomfortable, let's make it harder. So, deliberate discomfort, intentional stress in the domain we're trying to improve is how we train resilience. We have to have those strategies to manage the stress in our place, of course, but when we're at a point of function, we need to train that skill, which is resilience or whatever it may be that we're trying to get better at specifically. So the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands, is another exercise physiology principle that I love. Whatever you want to get better at, do that exact thing. Now,
mm,
I like using fitness as a vehicle for training resilience. Without question, I give different workout ideas that are going to make you stronger, faster, and I talk about the adaptations that a given workout will have. But when you approach training to build a resilient mindset or mental states, that is going to help you apply what exercise or training can do in the physical realm across domains. And I'm big on this one because you see some pretty exceptional athletes be amazing at their craft, but an absolute nightmare and chaotic person in other aspects of their life. They have the tools, they have the concepts in place, but they're not applying them well across domains. They can stay
mm,
calm in the storm when it comes to the physical endeavor, but the calm does not remain across domains in their personal lives, in business, in whatever it may be. So, how can we have that awareness and those strategies conceptually start applying in our areas of opportunity that are other domains where we are not as strong as we'd like to be? So that's a big thing that I write on. That's a big thing that I like doing with some of the people that work with me, is creating progressive challenges at a manageable level to build up whatever skill we're trying to work on, whether it be fitness, whether it be cognitive, whether it be spiritual, and it's all ties back to resilience.
mm.
But I would love to hear your takes on that at some point, Adam. I'd love to talk to you about that for sure, because you, of course, are very familiar with that and you write beautifully on it.
Yeah, and I think what resonates with me, because I think like what like along the lines of what Adam was saying, I've had some bottom moments in my life, and what I was writing down. And if you all haven't noticed, I've been taking notes. I hope you're taking notes too. I think I'm 4 pages deep right now, taking notes from Kyle. So this is fantastic information. Something I wrote down was consistent competence. I think at times where I was at rock bottom, I felt totally incompetent, like I wasn't doing anything right. And what's the point in really going forward, or aiming to do better if I can't even get these things right? And I think, like you were saying, what's really helpful with these rock bottom moments is finding things that you can be competent at, and finding things that, even if they're the smallest things. I think we've been mentioning a lot of books on this talk, but I mean, Atomic Habits has been a book that I've reread. I think I've read it 4 times. I definitely have made it a thing just to read it every year. That was one of the big books, along with Man's Search for Meaning. which is amazing because my mom passed that book to my little brother who was going through a hard time, and then he passed that book on to me when I was going through a hard time. I definitely recommend that book. And just a little context on Viktor Frankl, he was a Holocaust survivor and went through a lot and talks about it, and then developed his own psychotherapy, right? Logotherapy, and changed so many lives because of that. And but did it all, he had to focus on the little things, right? Of just getting through the days, and being able to develop that resiliency through really hard, uh, yeah, that hard daily basis of living in a concentration camp. But with the atomic habits as well, that helped me with was just identifying little tiny things, little habits, things that you. One thing that stuck out to me that he said, I think he was helping somebody that was struggling with their weight and with working out, and it was just the small habit of going to the gym for at least 5 minutes, uh, three times a week to start with. And then over time, you find yourself, you're there for 5 minutes. Well, okay, maybe I can push that to 10. Maybe I could push that to 15. Hey, maybe I push that to 30. And before you know it, now you're working out 30 minutes, 3 times a week. Okay, now let's try four days. And like you're saying, I think it's that progression, right? Where you can start honing into something that's healthy, a healthy habit that starts to align more with your identity and your values and who
Completely.
you want to be, right?
Absolutely. Like you said, consistent competency. And in this case, consistently pursuing what makes you a little uncomfortable and becoming more comfortable. And it's amazing. You do that long enough. And then what you're comfortable doing used to be perceptually impossible for you months or years ago. But it's a progression. And there's this skill development hierarchy. And I always forget this guy's name that created it because it's brilliant. And I should learn it by now, the amount of times I brought it up. Maybe this conversation will make me do that. But the four stages of skill development. We start off subconsciously incompetent. We don't even know what we're terrible at. We don't have awareness of some of these things. It's not on our radar. But then you start having conversations with somebody, or you reflect on opportunities in your life, and now you have conscious incompetence. You know this is an area of your life that you want to change. Maybe because it's your
Mhm,
actions are not aligned with your values. One of the best reasons in the world. So now, how do we create conscious competence? And that requires showing up with consistency, with effort, and with intention. And with that discipline over time, showing up with a good attitude, and the more you do anything, the better you get at it. You start dealing with those progressive benefits, those adaptations that come before. Now we are kind of consciously confident. We are more comfortable doing what used to be uncomfortable. And that is a long time you spend in that realm. But the significant improvements that you can make can reverse habits, replace habits. I'm a big fan of not focusing on bad habits, but replacing them with better ones. And the more
mhm,
you add productive habits to your life, the less you want to pursue those unproductive ones. So the more you focus on anything, the more you get from it, even the bad stuff. So we start focusing on productive things, it makes less room available for the bad things. But when you talk about mastery, that's subconscious competence. That's truly
mm,
rewiring your instincts for optimized output. And that, of course, takes a long time, a lot of intention, a lot of discipline, and a lot of effort, but a worthwhile pursuit after you've determined certain skills that are of most benefit to you. And that's why I say absorb what is useful, discard what is not, make what is uniquely your own, according to Bruce Lee, because that answer is going to be unique to everybody. What is most beneficial for you and your values and what you want out of life? There are conceptual strategies that can apply, but giving yourself enough time to become at least consciously competent. And I'm a big believer of like 1 month programming. You can, a month is a long enough time to figure out if something, I mean, first of all, it's a long enough time to have significant improvements in whatever domain you're trying to train in. But also not so long that you hear about habit development taking 66 days on average. You don't hear as often that Hallmark study being the range of 18 to like 256 days. But on average, let's say about 3 months for habit development. And that's fine.
right.
But how to,
Yeah.
like, what is that habit and how beneficial is it for you? We can go far less time giving it a long enough time to see if it's of subjective benefit to us, which in many ways is more important than objective benefit. How does it align again with who you are and who you want to be? But then the more you work on that, we're prone to plasticity throughout our lifespan. That old critical window theory is pretty much gone. Don't get me wrong, children learn how to walk and learn language quite a bit because the environments are optimized for them at that time and their brains are sponges. But our brains can be sponges throughout life. And the more that we focus on developing skills, we just have more responsibilities, more considerations that as our brains completely evolve and that prefrontal cortex is completely formed around like 26 to 28 years old on average. But there are so many examples of the plasticity of the brain well into late years in life just because of consistency, intention, and effort, and whatever is most important to you. And that is an empowering thought because we can change our neurologic habits, what happens at a subconscious level with enough time in the arena. And that is an empowering thought because, again, if it's important to us, we can optimize it. And yeah, knowing that stress physiology is the same no matter the cause is another empowering thought because now I know I can intentionally cause it and the same response happens. So if I intentionally cause it, this is my opportunity to train my instincts, to optimize
Mm,
my developed strategies to respond across domains, which is why I love training for resilience rather than to get stronger. I do strength training, but I still look at it from the frame set of my mindset, my attitude, my focus on recovery, all of that plays into how I show up in other domains of my life. So I have gotten stronger. I have done some pretty cool athletic feats. But a lot of the time, the reason I was doing it was in response to trying to become more resilient, to show up for my family, to show up for serving others through, of course, my job in the military, but in general, and other things that are higher on the list of my core values.
that's fantastic.
I'm going to let you know just in case. I plugged my phone in, but it's doing one of those things where it's not drawing energy and it's just going down. So I don't know if it's going to kick off at some point. I'm down to now 2%. So
Whoa!
yeah,
Woo!
yeah,
That escalated.
yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah,
All right, so we're getting close then.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, and I don't know if we have time to talk about this, but we were talking a little bit about, like, when a habit becomes an addiction. Do you wanna hit on that really quick, or at least
Easy,
just from what you've
easy.
seen with
And
your
I think I
students?
could hit it on it pretty quick. I think habits and addictions are the same thing. It just has to do with function and time. So very much like the stress response, intensity and time present is probably what differentiates a habit from an addiction. We like anything can be done in excess, anything can be done detrimentally without conscious effort. But because of the plasticity of our system, if you do something subconsciously long enough without thinking consciously about the effects it's having on you, before you know it, you have a subconscious habit developed, a subconscious competency, a self mastery in the wrong realm. That and
Mm,
it's way harder to unlearn a skill than it is and then relearn a new one than it is to just learn it well in the first place. But a we are a culmination of our skills. Most of them, without conscious effort, intention, and consistency, are less than ideal. And some of these addictions, in my opinion, are just progressive habits that were used without conscious alignment with values and with your values. And you do it long enough, and it is way harder to reverse some of these things because these habits are typically tied around very natural urges that we have as human beings during this time of abundance. So it's a very interesting challenge that we have when it comes to addiction, whether it's with medicines, porn, food, and even comfort. I mean, there's so many things that without a diagnosable criteria for addiction for some of these urges, management of urges. If you can manage and overcome urges, and another one being fear, I mean, there's your path to self mastery. I mean, like the war within, the things that our bodies tell us that it needs to do, and separating again the stimulus that we get from the environment when it's not life or death situation, and then the response. There's your opportunity. Viktor Frankl put it as well as anybody. I love his quotes, but inserting space and optimizing the ability to be rational to effectively respond to whatever demand is in your life is your opportunity for resilience. It is your opportunity for self mastery. Of course, going the wrong way, that those habits can become so unproductive, so detrimental, and so progressively worsened that they become addictions that influence every aspect of your life. And it's interesting how stress, when not managed well, particularly like stress from some of those higher tier levels on the hierarchy of needs. So like when you talk about like fulfillment and not feeling fulfilled even though your base level needs are met, it's funny how stress and ironic how stress compromises your base level needs. So when you ruminate and you're having a hard time because of misalignment between your core values and your actions, which is not something probably people reflected on too much in the most ancient of times until you started getting civilized nations, stoicism, organized religion, and everything else. Probably weren't reflecting on that too much. Probably were reflecting more on how do we fulfill these base level needs.
Right.
But now that we have the higher level needs, we compromise and we do ourselves a disservice by not sleeping as well, by not eating as well. Our systems become tarnished by the stress response not recovering from it. Prolonged cortisol and everything else. We know all the science behind it, but just it's our inability to rationalize and separate a stress response from a particular stressor and then applying it to all domains. So again, stress physiology is the same no matter the input. But I love the fact that the parasympathetic nervous system activation or the slow down recovery of the stress response is also the same regardless of cause. So when you intentionally cause stress in a domain that you are able to manage and recover from, yes, you amplify the stress response, but when you recover from that, you cause slowdown of the response from everything. And that's why that delayed gratification in whatever domain you're trying to get better, that gratification feels so much better than anything else because it's earned and it slows everything down to help you get back to orienting to what you can control and rationally focus on. Again, why I love intentional stress.
Well said. Well said. Well, I think we'll wrap it up because I think you might be close to your battery dying, which gosh, I literally like it's so funny. You get these new phones, right? And I started at like 100% and I'm down to 54 and I have my charger in. I don't know what the heck is going on here. But
Maybe we're making the phone think too much with the knowledge that we're putting through it. Just we're blowing
I
the
think
phone from.
so.
No.
I think the phone will be now resilient after this discussion.
Or maybe I'm a
Uh,
hypocrite and talking about preparation. I didn't come prepared with a charger for our conversation until halfway through. It could be that too.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
We'll
It
have to do
happens.
this
I've
again,
done
bro.
that many times. Yeah, man. It was great talking with you. Really appreciate too all the engagement in the chat, some questions and reflections, which is awesome. And I guess we'll just end this on this. So you have the Resilient Mental State Substack. Where else can people find you? And I see you're repping a shirt too that you got.
Yeah.
Is that with your business?
No, that's Gina Kazaza that was on here. That is her podcast that I was on. Just
Okay.
coincidentally we're in today. So
Shout out to
I was on
Gina.
that. I was on that a little while ago, and she sent me the shirt as a nice little
Oh,
gift after
cool.
that. But no, she's great. She's also on Substack. But yeah, Substack is definitely the best way to reach me. Direct message me on there. Engage in the community thread with the reflective questions, or yeah, let me know anything else you got going on. I'm pretty passionate about this stuff. I don't do it for money in any way. I got a full time job. I'm a dad, but it is I do it because I'm talking to myself either yesterday or in the past, myself
Right.
today to make me better, or trying to prepare for the future and the best that I can. I also do it to leave something behind for my children if, God forbid, I don't wake up tomorrow. But it's pretty cool to see it starting to resonate with other people. And the more I do it, like anything else, the better you get, and the more I can make sense of some of these thoughts and things that I've been teaching for over a decade. But it's one thing to like talk about it and take a curriculum and teach it. It's another to like write it down and make it your own. Again, taking knowledge
Sure.
and making it your own wisdom. And that's actually what I'm trying to do in real time. So yeah, appreciate this platform, and look forward to all the future connections and collaborations we can do.
Yeah, look forward to talking with you. And everybody, thanks for hopping on today. We'll post this later on my YouTube channel, as well as the full video on Substack and be on Apple, Spotify podcasts as well. So, everyone, have a fantastic rest of your day, your weekend, and stay resilient, right? Stay resilient. Keep fighting the
Absolutely.
good fight.
Good mantra. Thanks again, brother.
Right on. Talk to y'all later. Bye.